Welcome back to another Senators Post Media One-on-One. I'm Bruce Garrioch, pleased to be joined by Callum Fraser, our Senators writer, and we are going to look here, Callum, as we speak. The Senators have 25 games left in the regular season. They are 6 points out of a playoff spot as they prepare to face the Detroit Red Wings on Thursday night. It's going to be a race to the finish line. They are not in a very good position. They've got a couple of teams in front of them. The task, Callum, isn't impossible, but it's difficult. Where do you kind of see them right now?
I think it's all about how quickly you can get to your game where you left off, right? Like they had rattled 5 wins out of 6 games off before the Olympic break. And even that loss against Carolina, that was still a really, really good game. And James Reimer just couldn't make a few saves that they needed. So they've been playing really, really good hockey. And, like moving up and down the ice in super cohesive 5-man units. And we've been watching practices recently. And obviously they don't involve Tim Stützle and Jake Sanderson and Brady Tkachuk and Nicholas Mattampalo. But, Travis Green spoke a couple days ago about how they're ramping up practices and, looking to hit the ground running. So it really is all about how quickly they can find that game that they had, because they looked like one of the better teams across the entire National Hockey League before the Olympic break. And I think that it is a tall task, and especially because not only do you have to leapfrog a couple of really good teams in the Columbus Blue Jackets, who have won 11 of their past 12, I believe, and then on top of that too, like a really strong Washington Capitals team, but it seems like the 2 wildcard spots could possibly go to both the Atlantic Division, and no one's really faltering ahead of the Senators in the Atlantic. There's only one. There are no teams that are below 500 in that division, and you look at the last 10 games before the Olympic break, and the Sens were 6-3-1, but every other team that's ahead of them, the Boston Bruins, Montreal Canadiens, Buffalo Sabres, Tampa Bay Lightning, and I'm forgetting one, and Detroit Red Wings, they all had a great record heading into that Olympic break. So no one has faltered yet. Surely it's going to change at some point. But yeah, I totally agree. They have a really, really tough road ahead. And I'd put their chances around 25, 30% right now. They're not dead. They're absolutely not dead, but it is tough.
Strength of schedule is something that I look at on Tankathon all the time, and they are ranked 9th in terms of strength of schedule. And some teams ahead of them are higher, including the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Boston Bruins, Tampa Bay Lightning. Not just divisional teams, but a lot of teams in the East are on that list. I figured, Callum, they're going to play at a 750 pace to even have a hope of making it.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, the pace that everyone is on right now, it is not going to be like it was last year when you saw the Montreal Canadiens get into the playoffs at 91 points. That's just simply not going to happen. So, yeah, they do have a pretty tough schedule, but this team has played pretty well, actually, against good teams. There's been some dud performances, obviously, like when they, got it handed to them in Colorado a month and a half ago. But they rattled off some really, really impressive wins against good teams. Like everyone will remember that game against the Avalanche in Ottawa. They beat the Vegas Golden Knights a couple weekends before the Olympic break. And then, you talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins. Well, they beat them right before the Olympic break. And Linus Ullmark, who I'm sure we're going to talk about soon, was pretty good in that game. So I think that they end up elevating their game actually when they play tougher competition. So we'll see. I think this team is up for the task, but yeah, again, it's not going to be easy. And 6 points is actually a lot more than I think than people might believe it is, because who knows if they're going to get the tiebreaker, and then again, teams ahead of them just keep winning.
And all of this, Callum, is a backdrop. All this is happening too with a backdrop of the trade deadline. I think Steve Staois is of the opinion that he'd like to be a buyer. And I don't blame him for wanting to buy. But I think he also has to look at the reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation is you're 6 points out with 25 games left. You don't need a historic run, but you need a very strong run to make the playoffs. You don't need a Hamburglar type run where you have to go 23-2-1, but you're 23-2, but you need a fairly significant number of victories, and you're going to need at least 18 or 19 wins in that stretch, and you're going to need some of those in regulation as well. If you're sitting in a seat, what do you do at the deadline? I have made it fairly clear that they are looking for a top four defenseman, and I am quite confident that that is the case. I think they've been looking for a top six forward since last May, but I think that's an area they can kind of move around some parts, put Zetterlund up there, Perron, Giroux, like move guys around. Do you go out and get that defenseman at this deadline? I guess is where I'm going with all this.
I think it's all about whether or not you can, right? Like they don't have the first round pick that they could deal this year. Their prospect pool is quite bare. It's quite dry right now, right? Like you'd like to think that Carter Tkachuk and Logan Hensler are, bona fides and that they could come in the next couple of years and be impact players. But other than that, you don't really have guys that are well known across the league that you could deal that are still in the minors or in junior or in the NCAA. On top of that, we mentioned they don't have a ton of picks either. And obviously this is all about upgrading on Nick Jensen in the top four, but like I just don't get who you would deal at this point, right? And Jensen's not going to get you a ton in return. So obviously, if I'm Staois and I can add a top four defenseman, sign me up. But I wonder about what it's going to cost them. And on that topic of the top six forward, I have similar thoughts on that. But also, I feel like this team's going to kind of look at David Perron coming back and feel like that's actually kind of a bit of an acquisition. He was surely with an injury like that, he was dealing with it for a significant period of time. We haven't talked to him yet, but that's not exactly an injury that just simply pops up out of nowhere. Like typically players play through that for a considerable period of time. So you're going to get him back and, presumably super healthy and rested for the push. And I think looking back on last season, David Perron did not play very well up until the final third, and then he was great in the playoffs as well. So this is a guy, a veteran player who ramps up his game as the season goes on, and I think that they could see that as maybe a potential pseudo acquisition right after the trade deadline or around that road trip that they're going on. So unfortunately, Staois doesn't have a lot of pieces that he can play with, but he is crafty, and he's had a few trades over the last year and a half that have been pretty impressive. So I wouldn't count him out, but I think it's difficult if you want to go after big name guys.
I guess my question on where they stand right now is the goaltending, and where is Linus Ullmark at? Is he in a good place? He took a break for mental health reasons. He was fairly good in those 2 games that he did play heading into the break. He was very good down the stretch last year. They basically need a repeat of that from Linus Ullmark.
Yeah, and I think that he's in a much better position now than he was obviously when he took the break. And I think potentially even more than right when they left off for the Olympics, right? He got another 2.5, 3 weeks to, work on himself, work on his game, take some time off, be with whoever he wanted to be with, his family, his friends, his teammates, whatever. And, potentially hit the ground running. He's looked pretty good in practice. I'm not a goalie guru, but both of the guys have looked pretty good in practice. And I think especially with a first save goalie like Linus, confidence is so important because he can't simply rely on, natural athletic ability. Obviously, he is an incredible athlete. He's a professional hockey player, but he's not exactly he doesn't play like an Igor Shesterkin or a Sergei Bobrovsky, right? He's a first save goalie. He's best when he's playing on top of his crease and super confident with that first save. And you know what? It actually fits in really well with this team because they're
But
super good
it's kind of
defensively.
funny though. Let me just chime in here for a second. I saw a goalie guru, Steve Valaket. He does some stuff for the Rangers, and he was saying he thinks, Callum, that Linus Ullmark relies too much on his athleticism, and he'd like to see him battle a little more.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that this team's very good at keeping shooters out wide and then also like cleaning up rebounds and whatnot. So I think that the problem has been with him actually like the first save. And if they can get that with how good their shot suppression is, then they're looking really good down the line.
I'm wondering if expected goals for, though, is an overrated stat. You look at that a lot more than I ever would. Um, you know, if ifs and buts were candies and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. Like that the whole expected goals for strikes me as a little odd.
Yeah, I mean, like stats are flawed, right? And actually, who is like a goals an expected goals merchant is Brady Tkachuk, with how many times that he like jams the puck in super close and tight in like really dangerous areas. And that's great, but it does inflate your stats in that area. I think that the reason why I like it so much is that it's shown how good defensively they are and actually how good offensively they are. And it's kind of proving exactly what we've thought and known the entire season, is that an 8.68 save percentage, the worst in the league by a long shot, is going to get you nowhere, right? So I just, to me, it's a really good indication of how well that like Travis Green has this team, turning on all cylinders and playing, like I mentioned, as 5-man units up and down the ice. And really, like, if they can continue playing like that in front of Linus and in front of Reimer, then they kind of just need an 8.85, 8.90 save percentage, and it looks really good.
Last thing here is you're going to have Brady Tkachuk and Jake Sanderson coming back with gold medals. We're going to leave the politics aside here. They'll wrap up the celebration at the State of the Union with their president on on Tuesday night. I'm not as offended by that as many are, but whatever. Winning a gold medal for your country has to help those guys coming down the stretch. And it also should teach them about winning.
Yeah, and I mean, a year and a half ago, they hadn't really played in many big professional hockey games, right? But then what happens? Brady goes and, makes a name for himself at the Four Nations. Jake gets in and actually was probably like a top 2 or 3 defenseman on that American team in the games that he played. Then they have that 6-game series with the Leafs where they showed a ton of fight, a ton of battle to get back into it. Jake scores that overtime winner. And Brady was just unbelievable in the latter half of that series. And then they go overseas and play in this, hopefully not once in a lifetime, because we expect NHLers to be there the next little while at the Olympics, but in something that they have both, I know Jake played like one game in 2018 or something like that. But something that they have both been clamoring for a very long time. And both played, relatively well. I think Brady was a monster in the preliminary round, and was pretty good in the quarters and semis. And I think Canada was just so dominant in the final that it was kind of hard to notice both of them in that gold medal game. But Brady walks away with 5 points in 6 games, +7, and like one of the more physical performances we've seen from him, especially this season. And, Jake was on a defense pairing with Zach Werenski that played some shutdown minutes. And, being on a pairing with a guy that is, one of the favorites to win the Norris in Zach Werenski's got to do wonders for Jake Sanderson's game. And he walks away with 2 assists and I think he was like -2 in 6 games, but they both, went the distance and are probably elated right now. And you've got to think that a lot of those games, like the Americans weren't really tested until the final, But you've got to think that a lot of those moments in the early parts of those quarters and semis, and then the entire game against Canada, that has to be something that changes you in a good way as a player. So yeah, they're coming back with nearly double the experience that they had before the Olympics, and hopefully it helps them for this stretch down the line, because we've heard it a lot from them in the past few years because of the position that the Sens have been in. But there's a lot of game sevens in the next couple months, and playing in a gold medal game, that's got to help your absolutely.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because from going forward, every game's a must win for them, and it will be interesting to see. I don't know that we'll resume this discussion before the first game of the playoffs, but let's hope we do.
Sure,
Callum,
absolutely.
Thanks very much. We got a lot of good coverage coming forward for Sens One-on-One. I'm Bruce Garrioch. Pleased to be joined today by my friend and coworker Callum Fraser of the Ottawa Citizen.